If you're a producer, you can find some of the most unique beat-making ideas in underground boom bap. And by using these ideas, they can help you separate your beats from the crowd and help you stand out. So today, let's talk about how you can make these beat ideas. I'm going to show you multiple sampling techniques, drum pattern selection tips, arrangement ideas, and a lot more. My name is Navi D. I've been making beats for over 15 years. I've produced for artists, got millions of streams on my own music. Anyways, let's jump right in. Now, there are two underground beats that I love and both use similar production ideas. Let's see if you can spot the similarities. One is Giannis by Freddie Gibbs.
I'd been dropped before, talked about it, rolled off before. Hard on my sleeve in the ATF at my mama though.
And the other is Auditorium by Mos Def.
Sometimes it's too hard to sit still. Things are so passionate, times are so real.
Other than the fact that both of these are made by Madlib, these beats share a similarity in that they both use Indian samples, they use multi-layering techniques, and they have dynamic arrangements. So this is the checklist I'll have in mind while trying to make decisions for this beat. So let's start at the top and look for an Indian sample. As always, YouTube is a great place to look. You can find great samples on all of these playlists that often pop up. So here's the one I'm going to go with. The reason why I chose this is because I really like the instrumentation in this sample. Those bellish keys sound like a unique idea to build my beat around. So let's start by importing the sample into my sampler here. But before we start chopping this sample up and creating, I want to treat the sample first. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, one of the things that you'll often notice in foreign samples as well as older samples is that they can almost sound degraded to the point where they become harder to use. For this sample, you can hear there aren't that many bright frequencies. The instruments and sounds in the sample aren't as present or clean, all because the recording has been degraded. So before I start creating and using this sample, I'm going to begin by adding this bit crushing tool here. For those that don't know, bit crushing can help you add more high frequencies to any sound that you use it on. You can hear what a difference this makes. So these new high frequencies will help this sample sound more present. And to help this problem out even more of missing high frequencies, I'm also going to introduce some layers of noise into this beat. Here I have some vinyl noise that I will use to help with this problem. And also, if you ever struggle with your beats sounding like there's something missing or like you're doing something wrong, you can download my free Better Beat checklist. It's a simple to use checklist that you can run through to make sure your beat isn't missing anything. There's a free link to download this in the description box below. But anyways, now that I have everything ready with my sample, let's chop this up and create a loop. Now, there are a million different ways I could chop this up. One approach to sampling is to identify one instrument within your sample and chop on every new note. This can help you put together a cohesive loop idea that actually makes sense. So with this sample, I could chop on every single keyboard note, but with this complex arpeggiating pattern, that would mean creating a lot of small chops. So instead, I'm going to have a more basic approach here and place my chops on the more simple bass guitar pattern within this sample instead. So here, even though I have far less chops to use, that's all right. The quality of your beat doesn't correlate with how many chops you make, so don't feel bad for being basic like this or even just looping if you want. So here is what I've created with these simple chops. Alright, that is the first one off this list. I have my Indian sample in place. But there's obviously more that I need to add into this beat. So next, let's fill up the low end of this beat a bit more. The bass inside of this sample feels a bit weak, so I'm going to use a very Madlibian idea for my low end, which is to add that wobbly bass that he's often known for. To do this, I will start by cloning my sample out, and I'll pitch this version of the entire sample down 1 octave. What this does is it shifts my entire frequency spectrum of my sample down so that that thin bass now sits in a lower, more subby frequency that I can use to fill up the low end a bit better. From here, I will EQ this and remove all the frequencies out from the sample other than the low end ones that I need, and I'll boost those. Next up, I'll add Decapitator. This is a distortion tool that I use whenever I need to beef up my drums or my bass, which is exactly what I need right now since this bass still feels weak. Now this bass feels much more thick and subby. Then the last step is to introduce that wobbly feel to the bass like Madlib often does. To do this, you can simply just use a tremolo effect. What this does is it takes the volume of your sound and makes it go up and down really fast. You don't need a fancy plugin to do this either. I know M Audio has a free tool called M Tremolo that you can use. And this will give you that unique Madlib bass effect. While I don't advise simply imitating, maybe using this idea on a different kind of bass or another instrument altogether can give you some cool, unique results. Alright, all that is left are my drums. Now with many of these beats, you'll notice that the drums don't stand out as much. And this approach with your drums can be helpful if you want your samples to stand out more, which is especially useful if you're using a sample as prominent or distinct as this one here. So to start, let's try using this snare here. Now this is a snare that I've built to be a hip hop snare, meaning it is a lot more forward and present, which is useful for most other kinds of beats. But again, in this particular case, because the sample is so prominent, I almost want a weaker snare. So I'm gonna grab an EQ and really cut the body out from the snare. As you can hear, this makes it sound much more weaker and almost frail, which is actually what I want in this scenario. So again, here's how the snare would have sounded in my beat without EQing it. And then after I EQ and weaken it. Far less present, and it's almost sounding integrated into the sample, which is what I want in this scenario. Next up, let's add in some kicks. From here, I will add some percussive elements. One of my bad habits lately that I've been trying to break recently is that I've been a little bit more deliberate with my percussion and hi-hats instead of just going into autopilot. So instead of creating a straightforward pattern like this, I'm going to go out of my way and try to build something a bit more unique rhythmically speaking. Alright, cool. I feel like my core loop here is sounding good so far. Now let's move on to the next part of this list, which is the idea of multi-layering. So another reason why I pick this sample is because there are a lot of different instrumentation that comes in and out throughout the entire song here. We have this sitar. We have this wind instrument here. And then later on in the sample, we have some strings that come in. And so this gives me a lot of pieces I can work with to create more layers that can easily stack on top of my current loop. So let's start this multi-layering process. First, we will build an idea using that sitar. What I will do is EQ it slightly to isolate the sound a bit more. And now let's grab some of these plucks and create a pattern. So here I've built a pattern for the first bar, but if I keep using these same notes for the whole loop, you'll notice that something starts to sound a bit off. The reason why it sounds off is because the progression in my beat changes, but these notes don't. So I think it would work better to change the sitar notes as well for the second bar when I do have that progression change. To do this, I'm simply going to clone this sample out, but I'm going to repitch this to drop it down 2 semitones to create a similar pattern, just at a different pitch for my second bar. Now that this sitar follows my progression, it sounds like it fits a bit better. The only reason why I'm able to do this is because the sample was just so simple. This is often why I advise producers to start using thinner, more basic samples that have more isolated instruments as they get more experienced, because it allows you to do these types of advanced techniques. Now I have created this new multi-layer to my beat, which I can cross off the list, but I do want to create more and more with other sounds within the sample. Let's try to use that string next. Once again, I'll start by EQing the other sounds out from the sample. You can hear if I didn't EQ this out, that percussion in the sample will end up getting in the way. And now let's layer this sound in. Perfect. So one thing I want to point out that I did with this sound was I moved its stereo presence. You can hear without any effects, these strings pretty much sit in a mono space. Having the strings sit here, they kind of get lost amongst all the other sounds. So what I did was I added a simple chorus effect and that pushed the sound outwards so it has its own space. Using stereo space in your beat is always an important idea that you should be thinking about, which again is something that I talk about in my free checklist that you can use if you ever get stuck. The download to this is in the description box below and it is 100% free. And finally, there was that wind wood instrument that also sounded like it could easily fit on top of the sample, so let's use that too. Alright, so all these ideas are sounding great. I have all these pieces that I can use to turn this into a full beat during my final step, which is to create a dynamic arrangement. What I mean by this is that I want to take these ideas and have them come in and out throughout the entire beat, but not in the usual way of hook, verse, hook, verse. I want to create something that moves and changes a bit more often and sporadically. So that's exactly what I've done with my arrangement here, and there are a few key ideas that you'll notice as I play them for you. For example, here is one idea. Here's another. And here's a third. So you may have noticed some common arrangement themes with these ideas. One is that in order to introduce many of these ideas into my beat, I had to minimize and reduce my other layers. Depending on how complex and full your layers are, you may find that momentarily getting rid of other pieces from your core loop can help you create more space. Another thing that you may notice is that I am bringing these ideas in and out at non-obvious times. It isn't as if once we reach the end of the bar, that is suddenly when we bring in a new idea or sound. Here I have a more spontaneous approach where ideas can start and stop partway through a loop, for example. This is the idea of blurring the lines in your arrangement so it becomes less predictable. And that's pretty much my beat. Again, feel free to download that free checklist if you struggle to get your beats to sound full and complete. Hopefully you liked this video. If so, hit like and subscribe. If not, I'm sorry for wasting your time, and maybe I'll see you next week. Bye for now.